Okay, shall we start now? Hello, everyone. Today we are gathering about our second webinar on gender quotas in this region, Serbia, Albania, and Croatia. And it's very interesting to see what are the similarities and differences between ex-Yugoslav countries, Croatia and Serbia, and also Albania, because it's near and it's very interesting to see how it's going on now. I would like to say just a few words about our network. We started at November 2022 on our meeting in Institute of Social Sciences and Institute of for Philosophy and Social Theory in Belgrade. And it was about 30 people, more than 30 people. Also, Milica, and thank you very much for your supporting and help to our network, and also a few other colleagues from other countries. And we just started to foster our idea about the cooperation between these ex-Yugoslav states on the first place, in this region, in Balkan region, and also with Albania, Bulgaria, and we'll see in the future how it would be going on about the network. Just want to say that it's very important to stress that it's the first time that we are gathering about the political participation of women. And it's very interesting to have some cooperation, some mutual projects, and to share and to change our ideas and our research on gender and politics. Gender and politics on three levels: on the level of institutions, also in social movements, women movements, and also in civil society and social policy. And I think that it would be very, very interesting in the future. Now, I would say just a few words about the webinar. It's the second one. The first we had in February. This one, it's about the quotas, and it's important to see that we have some results in that field, and especially in Serbia, it's very interesting situation, because but I will represent because I'm the first presenter. And now I will give the floor to Milica just to have an introduction to all this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liliana. As Liliana said, my name is Milica Antić-Gabar, and I teach sociology and sociology of gender and some other courses at the University of Ljubljana. And I'm very glad that I joined this network, which is also on my interest. I will be chairing today's webinar titled Gender Quotas Changing Face on Politics in Albania, Croatia, and Serbia, Achievements and Limitations. Let me briefly say a few words about quotas. In a narrow sense, gender quotas are a type of equality measure that requires nominating bodies to select, candidate, or nominate a certain number of, or proportion of women for various political bodies or positions. In this sense, it is often seen as a fast track, as Drew Dedalo report called it, to gender equality in politics. As an improvement toward gender equality in this area has proven to be slow. This can be done by setting a certain proportion, percentage, or number of seats or places to be filled by allocated to women and or men, generally according to the certain rules or criteria. Quotas can be either gender-specific or gender-neutral. Women's quotas require a minimum of number of percentage of women among candidates. Gender-neutral quota system set both a minimum and maximum number of both genders. A broad debate about gender quotas began in the 90s, and the term and the concept remain controversial until today. It has been used in different contexts and in several variants as women's quotas, sex quotas, or gender quotas, the later or more recent development. In some countries, for example, in France, they call it parité or parity, which seeks or aspires to true equality, a share 50-50. Types of gender quotas can be reserved seats, legislated candidate gender quotas, or voluntary non-legislated gender quotas. After almost 30 years of working and researching on this issue, we know that quotas can do what quotas can do in politics, but what are their limitations in specific contexts, or what we cannot expect from quotas, but we do. This will be the topic of today's webinar. Just for your information, women still make only 26.5% of the world's national parliaments, according to Interparliamentary Union data from January 23. So we would like to see what our speakers will add to these researches. And let me briefly introduce the first speaker. Ljiljana Čičkarić she has a doctorate in sociology. She's a principal research fellow at the Institute of Social Science in Belgrade, Serbia, where she also acts as a head of the Center for Sociological and Anthropological Research. She is a former Fulbright visiting scholar at the University of Massachusetts and Harvard Kennedy School. Women in Politics, Policy Program, and former visiting research fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study, University of Amsterdam, at the Center of Gender Research, University of Oslo, Queen's University, Belfast, LSE, University of London. She is also head of Feminist and Masculinity Research Section in the Serbian Sociological Association. Her research interests are connected to quotas and parliamentary gender politics, radical right populism and anti-gender politics, violence against women in politics, women's leadership, gender equality policy, and the similar. Recent publication on legislative quotas and political representation in Serbia. She published in Sabine Lang et al. A book titled Party Politics and Implementation of Gender Quotas last year. So Ljiljana, the floor is yours. I'm all the ears to hear what is the situation in Serbia. Please take the floor. We don't hear you.
It's okay. Now you're here. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. I just want to say that in 2023, it's 33rd anniversary of adoption of Constitution of Republic of Serbia and established of multi-party elections and the subsequent reinstitution of parliamentarism. And during this period, establishing of representative democratic institutions, women have come a long way from being systematically marginalized in political life to making up almost 40% in the Serbian parliament. And in a short period in 2020, it was about 50% of women in executive branch. And on the first sight, it's a very good remark, I can say. And of course, after the latest 2022 elections, women held 35.2% of seats in parliament. And within the Balkan region, and also comparing with the European Union member states, it's a very good score. But on the other hand, there are some difficulties and shortings that I will concerning later in this presentation. On this place, I want to point out also the situation in 80s and 90s in previous century, in 20th century. First in 80s, when we had the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, and almost in all republics, it was about 20% women in parliaments. And comparing with Western Europe, when it was 13%, it was also a good score. But after the first election in 1990, multi-party election, the situation deteriorated in a tremendous way. And 4.9% of candidates were women, and only 1.6% women were elected. And in 1996, 2.8% of women elected in Serbian parliament. We can see that the situation it's very, and it was, of course, it was worse on local level. And just we can say that after Milosevic's fall and after the elections in 2000, the situation was little better. It was about 10% women entered the parliament as MPs. Just I want to say that three factors contributed to Serbia employing the legislative quotas for women. First is the history of women's political organizations in socialist period, and especially in the 90s and the beginning of 2000. And we could talk about the Women's Party, the Belgrade Women's Lobby, the Women's Parliament, the Women's Political Network formed in 2000, and so on. Also, the international organizations, EU, UN, OSCE, and also played a pivotal role in the process of demanding quotas also. And I would like to say that elite political actors adopted quotas to further strategies related to the preservation of their political power. And finally, quotas were accepted as an integral part of EU accession discourse, which in fact served to legitimate domestic demands to implementing quotas. And very soon after, in 2003, we had on the local level, with introduction of gender quota, at least 30% of candidates of the underrepresented gender on the election list, and 1 in every 4 candidates had to be also a woman. We had a situation that also we don't have a legislative quota on the national level, but just on local level. And in elections on 2004, we prescribed 30% quota on the underrepresented gender candidates of the electoral list, and 1 in every 4 list positions on a national level. In that case, on elections in 2007, this introduction of quotas produced changes in the sphere of political presentations of women in parliament. In 21.6% of MPs, women MPs in parliament, and it was, I can say it was the first step in introducing quotas in parliamentary system. But the main points of critique was that parties that centered their campaigns around European levels had encouraged women to go to the polls, but they failed to implement European standards or representation of women in parliament. Because we had the proportional system, electoral system, but open election list system that apparently did not adequately incorporate the principle that demanded on every 4 candidates in consecutive ranking being women. and many parties do not have this obligation, and of course there were not sanctions for that kind of behavior. And we are going now on the second level. It was electoral system reform that happened in 2011. And it was particularly detrimental for women. Closed electoral lists introduced for voters, fixing the order of candidates upon the lists, as well as closed lists for parties, required them to respect the order of the lists. And all this, I mean, in combination with will of voters, it was a very good result on distributing parliamentary mandates, of course, for women. And we can say that after the election in 2012, we have finally 33.3% of women MPs. Also, in 2014, it was 34, and 2016, it was about 37, 85 out of 250 MPs in parliament. But still, we do not have sanctions for political parties. And finally, final step, it's the introduction of the strong quota of 40% candidates of electoral lists for parliamentary and local elections. And it's very, very obvious that stronger quota regulations did a good thing for descriptive representation of Serbian women in Serbian parliament. Finally, in one moment in 2020, we had 43.5% women. And after these, I mean, the last elections in last year, we finally have 37%. But I would like to stress now just a few words about the potential reformative role of gender quotas, because there are systematic, as we know, systematic barriers and constraints to female candidates to their progression on political ladder. We know that. Also the political parties and their leaders fighting against promotion of women in political life, and women are very much in situation that have to fight against marginalization and in wider process in transformation of Serbian political culture, because we know the culture is very, very traditional, and it's not in favor of political action activity of women. And refusal of recruit women to top positions and lack of support also provided by to running for office provided by leaders and party colleagues are very I mean, impediment to quota implementation, particularly in parties of regional, ethnic, and minority orientations. And it's very interesting. The party leaders nominate women who have a loyalty to them and their loyalty to them and their party agenda, not the interests of those women who vote for them. And they use that kind of twisted pattern of gender equality to soften, modernize, and humanize the image of party. I'm especially referring on Progressive Party, which is in favor today in political life in Serbia. And they recruit more women and female members because the number of women, it's not adequate to the level of political participation in decision making, because the more level women in political life does not result their political power. And that's the main question that I will, and some kind of, we face today with some kind of ghettoization of those women that are in parliament, because they are not very much in favor with women in other segments in structures in society. I mean, in academia, also in private and in private companies, also in civil society, and I think that the cooperation is not on the satisfied level, and sometimes they feel just like that are in favor of their political parties, and they support, of course, the ideology of their political parties, and they have some kind of trilateral role in whole this process, because they have to act as a member of the party, as a member of parliament, as a member of the voters portion that they gave votes for them, and sometimes it's very difficult and do not result in favor of making women interests in better positions, especially when it comes to laws, and when it comes to fixing some problems and solutions, making some solutions on women problems in society. And especially, I want to pose a question on the end of these presentations. Is the situations now that quotas are in favor of transformation of gender equality mainstreaming in parliament or not? Because we don't face that kind of acting in parliament, and the problem is that this transformative potential of quotas are not in their they are not in a full competence, and especially when it comes to women in parliaments and women in political parties. I think that they are not effective, politically competent, politically knowledged, and effective in their activities and acting in parliament, and also especially in political parties, because all that starts in the base in political parties, that they do not have a strong base for their women activities, especially activities that toward the solutions of women problems. That it would be the presentations of mine, and I would like to change ideas after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liliana, presenting us this long way to change something after the introduction of gender quotas to the direction of the betterment of the life of women. I'm sure that we will discuss this ghettoization of women in parliament also after all three speakers, as we decided to present all the papers in a row and then open the discussion about them. So thank you for now. Please do write your comments and questions, and then when we will open the discussion, you can jump into the discussion. Now I would like to introduce our second speaker. Our second speaker is Marietta Shinko. Marietta Shinko is the assistant professor of the Faculty of Political Science, University of Zagreb. She was a visiting fellow at the University of Ljubljana, Slovenia, and University of Alberta, Canada. She works mainly in gender and politics, comparative politics, and public policy fields. She introduced and teaches the courses Gender and Politics at the Faculty of Political Science, both in Croatian and in English. She published work includes articles and edited books. Her most recent publications include the article Rodno osveštavanje politika u Hrvatskoj, prožimajući ili marginalni cilj nacionalnih strategija, in English, Gender Mainstreaming in Croatia, Pervasive or Marginal Goal in National Strategies in last year, and the book chapter Only Stands in Women's Parliamentarian Representation and Quota Implementation in Croatia since 2011, which is now this year, in Party Politics and Implementation of Gender Quotas, Resisting Institutions, Palgrave Macmillan. So, Marietta, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. I prepared a little presentation. I hope you can see it. So PowerPoint. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay, good. So good day to you all. The topic of this presentation is quota implementation in Croatia, more precisely how Croatian parties are adhering to the quota, and in that process, how do they treat their female members? This is a longitudinal study of the national level, so basically of parliamentary representation of women in Croatia, and it focuses primarily on the major parties, Croatian parliamentary parties, and in specific major parties. So the course of the presentation is as follows. I intend to start with the introduction, which outlines the legal backdrop of the research as well as my research question. Thereafter, I will give a short overview of the political participation of women in Croatia. I will then go to present the main analysis, and that is what are the nominating practices of Croatian parties, how are they positioning women on lists, and if there is any sanctioning for quota non-compliance in Croatia. Obviously, the conclusion will give a brief overview of my findings. So the first act on gender equality was enacted in 2003, and it introduced affirmative action, and it stipulated how positive measures should be used, so emphasis on should be, used to promote equal participation of women and men.
Marietta, can you put down your presentation, because we are still on the first one.
You're still on the first one?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. New share. Okay, I'm trying to stop share. If I do it like this, is that better?
No, it's still the first.
I don't understand. I stopped the share. So you can't see anything.
We do see, but only the first one, and then the rows, the rest, but it's so small that we cannot see.
Okay, well, I will then just continue, but unfortunately there is a lot of data that is on the presentation that you now won't be able to see.
Marietta, may I just advise maybe one last time so that you share again?
Yes.
And then in the lower right corner, there is a sign for full screen, and that you click that. So if you could share just once.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the corner right, there's this option full screen that you go on that. That's the last small icon before these lines for the size of the letters. Could you click on that?
Okay, I did. No?
No, it did not change, at least not in my case. It's a pity.
Okay.
Sorry, I wanted to give it a try once again.
Yes, of course. This is what is really stupid about. Okay, I will just do one more thing. Can
Maybe
you see this? Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay, can you see when I'm moving
Yeah.
it?
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
so
it's okay.
this is a
Nice.
PDF. Okay, this is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
PDF to the rescue.
Okay.
Okay, so back to the actual topic. First act on gender equality in 2003. So it did introduce affirmative action, but good intentions notwithstanding, there were no sanctions for non-compliance. The second act on gender equality in 2008 was adopted as an organic act. So that's an act that regulates constitutionally defined freedoms, so making it superior to other regular acts. The act defines gender balanced representation, prescribes quota for all levels of legislative elections, introduces sanctions for non-compliance. In essence, it obligates political parties to introduce positive measures to attain a 40% representation of the underrepresented sex, how it is defined in Croatia, while compiling lists for any legislative election, or they will face penalties. There is one formal restriction for the implementation of the quota and one major omission. So the quota requirements are enforceable in 11 electoral districts. This excludes the districts for election of national minority representatives. And in spite of feminist advocacy, the motion to include a zipper was left out of the Act for Gender Equality in 2008. So considering the findings of the literature on descriptive representation of women and quota implementation in European democracies, and also considering the peculiarities of Croatia's electoral party and quota system development, the following questions need to be answered. Are parties abiding by the quota requirements and nominating more women? And are state authorities sanctioning those that are not? Additionally, and though this is not a part of Croatia's quota design, the positioning of female and male candidates on the electoral lists becomes crucial for the fulfillment of the overall quota objective, a gender-balanced representation in political and decision-making public bodies, as it is prescribed in the Act on Gender Equality in Article 12. So how did female parliamentarians fare in the last decades? In the 1990s, women were virtually absent from the Croatian parliament. In this, the invisibility phase, as I dubbed it, women's descriptive representation was an average of 5.6%. As can be seen from the figure, a sudden turnaround happened in the 2000 elections, which coincides with the introduction of the PR, so proportional representation system in Croatia. In this and the next 3 election cycles, female descriptive representation oscillated around 20% as an average value. This phase can be dubbed the glass ceiling phase. The first cause for concern over the predictability of even this 1/5 of women's share came after the parliamentary elections in 2015, and the gravest of predictions were fulfilled in 2016, when only 12.6% of women were elected. It seems, however, that the last election results might signal another turnaround in women's parliamentary representation, as the highest number of women, 22.5% to date, was elected. So apart from a slight decrease during the 2016 elections, women's presence on lists was steadily increasing, as you can see on this table. The largest number of women was nominated in 2011, and in 2020, the highest share of women in the total number of candidates was achieved. Of course, this data obscures the differences between lists and the positioning of women on them. The comparison of the number of and percentages of women candidates and the number and percentages of elected women into parliament can still serve as an analytical clue. It is expected that women are not positioned high on the lists, and it is assumed that the 40% quota is being met by the smaller parties and not the 2 biggest ones. So for those who don't know, the two biggest political parties, parliamentary parties in Croatia since the beginning of the 90s are HDZ and SDP, so the Croatian Democratic Union, the Social Democratic Party. So these two parties combined win between 60 and 70% of parliamentary seats. It is from the ranks of these parties that the biggest number of female MPs derive from. So 65% of all female MPs in the current Sabor, Croatian parliament, 45% in the previous, 47% in the 8th, 68% in the 7th term of Sabor. It is clear that these parties are the most important ones for a greater parliamentary representation of women. Compared to smaller parliamentary parties, they do not appear to be willing to adjust to the quota requirements, though. Figure shows how these parties adhere to the quota in the last 4 election cycles. So in the case of SDP, we can see a sudden change in course at the 2020 elections when only 20% of their lists were not complying to the quota, compared to 50% and more in the previous parliamentary elections. HDZ, on the other hand, isn't making any changes in their nominating practices. So as you can see, their best result in quota adherence was in 2016, when only 81% of their lists were not complying to it. So less than 20 were. At the last elections, none of their lists complied with the quota. In the last 4 elections, a drastic discrepancy between the positions of male and female candidates on an aggregate level is visible. There is an inversely proportional relation between men and women. Men dominate the upper half of the lists, decreasing in number as they descend on the lists, whereas women are scarce in the upper, but manifold in the bottom part. When data is disintegrated by electoral cycle, an interesting fact emerges. In each cycle, there were more male than female candidates, as we know. But whereas in 2001, the ratio of women to men per position was more symmetrical, in 2015, this started changing. As this figure illustrates, there is a distinct dominance of men over women at the first 6 places on the list in the last 2 elections. So the gap between men and women at the upper positions on the lists widened. It became steeper as the percentage of women on the lists grew, and also the expectation that Act on Gender Equality will be enforced. So generally speaking, more women are being nominated. But what the data show is that this is done strategically and that it is context dependent. If there was an expectation at a specific election that the Act of Gender Equality will be enforced, gender balance on list increased. At the same time, we can see that the increase in number of women on the list is correlated to their worse positioning on the list. Finally, we can conclude that the threat of sanction had a bigger effect on smaller parties, who were the ones mostly implementing quota, than on the 2 major parties. So now it just remains to be seen, was this threat of sanction a real or an empty one? So the established official procedure for sanctioning parties that do not comply with the quota is complicated, and it is rife with institutional mistrust, inadequate coordination, and even gridlock. So the State Electoral Commission is the body with the authority to collect data on lists, evaluate them, and publish these findings. Then it is obligated to notify the Gender Equality Ombudsperson as the authorized supervisory body, and State Attorney's Office as the authorized plaintiff. It is, however, the municipal state attorney's offices that issue indictments, and municipal minor offense courts are courts of first instance ruling over them. So gender equality ombudsperson, as the independent supervisory body, can make inquiries, and thereafter all institutions are obliged to submit reports on the requested information, and that is regardless of the level of secrecy within 30 days from the date of the receipt of the request. However, gender equality ombudsperson has enormous difficulties acquiring this information because different institutions just ignore these requests. With regards to the sanctioning, non-compliance with the quota is a minor offense. If parties do not comply, they are to be fined with 50,000 kuna, previous kunas, now in euros. So that is about 8,300 American dollars. So per list, in the case for parliamentary elections. It is worth noting, however, that parliamentary parties receive some 330 kunas, or 55,000 American dollars, per representative per year from the state budget. So even the most rudimentary cost-benefit analysis shows that the sanction creates two classes of parties. Those who cannot afford to evade them, so these are obviously the smaller parties who are non-parliamentary parties, and those who can, major parliamentary parties whose nominating practices actually we need to change the most. So because state attorney's office continuously ignore the request from the gender equality ombudsperson, their annual reports are to date the only means that the gender equality person and the public actually gets information on the indictments issued on the basis of Gender Equality Act. Even journalists were faced with obstacles acquiring this information on the implementation of sanctions. So basically, the state attorney's office informed that they are collecting data from their municipal offices, and if they were trying to contact the municipal offices, they would ignore the inquiry or reply that they were not obliged to reply, or that they were not instructed by the State Electoral Commission, and so forth and so forth. So these annual reports done by the state attorney's office are inadequate because of two additional reasons. So the data is outdated. They usually published in the spring for the previous year, and they're presented summarily. So they would show how many indictments are on the basis of the Act on Gender Equality, but not specifically on the basis of Article 35, which is the one that prescribes sanctions for quota non-compliance. Yet even this rudimentary comparison between the number of all indictments issued and all the lists that did not adhere to the quota in a given year is proof enough of the diligence and commitment to the issue that the state attorney office has. So you can see that in the table. The table points, of course, to another impediment of the Croatian polity, and that is the sluggishness of the judicial branch. Generally, it is not unusual for cases to fail due to delays. This pertains to both courts and the state attorney's office alike. For instance, no indictments were issued even half a year after the July 2020 parliamentary elections. And it is questionable whether all the parties that did not comply with the quota in 2017 local elections were indicted at all. Now, the rate of conviction that we see here in the table might seem positive. However, when the amounts of awarded penalties are more closely inspected, a worrying finding emerges. The average penalty amount is about 12 to 15% of the penalty that is prescribed by the Act of Gender Equality. So just 15% of even that small amount that is prescribed in the Act of Gender Equality. Gender Equality Ombudsperson is justified in calling these pitiful punishments. So what my analysis showed was that Croatian parties were adjusting to the quota requirements gradually, with the exception of early elections that we had in 2016. But those were primarily the smaller parties. There was no gradual adjustment from the major parties. Croatian Democratic Union made no advances with regards to gender balanced lists at all, whereas Social Democratic Party abandoned the principle of gender balanced representation in 3 election cycles, and it seems that it's only now waking up again in the last election cycles. And the study has also shown the Kafkaesque proportions of quota violation sanctioning procedure in Croatia. The obligation and the guilt is always pushed somewhere else, the blame is pushed somewhere else. So it is always a circular explanation. So the state election commission claims to have notified the state attorney's office, that it has no statistics, municipal state attorney's offices, that they have not received notification, and so on and so on. So the answer to the second question on whether the parties are sanctioned for non-compliance, that is a resounding no. So it can be said that quotas were adopted, but not actually implemented in Croatia. There was no cost of defection, only cost of compliance for the parties. And the cost of compliance was low for minor parties, so they nominated women. On the other side, the major parliamentary parties included women on lists in a very pragmatic way, abiding by the letter, but not by the spirit of the act, placing female candidates at the bottom. There, they had few, if any, chances of electoral success. So despite the Act of Gender Equality legal provisions, the situation in Croatia is such that in practice, adherence is a matter of political parties' goodwill. At this point, it can be concluded that even though Croatia has legislative quotas de jure, they're de facto voluntary. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Marietta. Yes, you've in your presentation, it's very rich with the information, and I also have some I found some common ground for the discussion at the end. But first, we will like to invite Marcela Dauti to present her paper. Marcela is Associate Professor at the Department of Social Work and Social Policy at the University of Tirana. Her research examines how democratization process unfold at the community level, focusing on issues of political inclusion, democratic accountability, and government responsiveness. Dr. Dauti's work has been published in the British Journal of Social Work, International Journal of Social Welfare, and Journal of Women and Politics and Policy, among others. Prior to joining the University of Tirana, she was a Marie Curie Fellow at the Department of Government at Uppsala University, and she also holds the PhD from the Brown School of Social Work at the Washington University in St. Louis. Marcela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It's a pleasure for me to talk with you about the case of Albania. Here's the plan. I will provide a brief historical overview of gender quotas in Albania. I'm going to share with you some lessons learned, and then at the end, what I think should be done in terms of moving forward, promoting greater gender equality in Albanian politics. So Albania is not too different from the rest of the region. I'd say women's representation in Albanian politics declined significantly after the fall of communism. The figure here displays women's representation in the parliament from 1945 to 2005. I'd like to draw your attention to the years 1997, 2001, and 2005. women's representation in the parliament was lower than 1945, something experienced in the region as well. Here I've listed two main policies when gender quotas were introduced. So we have the Electoral Code and Gender Equality Law that introduced gender quotas in politics and established the importance of gender quotas in politics. The Electoral Code has established that gender quotas should support the underrepresented gender. So the underrepresented gender should comprise not less than 30% of the parliament, local governments, and election administration. So Albania is not short of gender equality mechanisms. I'm sure the list that I have included here is not unfamiliar to you. So currently there is a National Council for Gender Equality, National Coordinator for Gender Equality. There is a parliamentary subcommittee on gender equality and the prevention of violence against women and gender equality officers. And most of these mechanisms exist at the central level as well as at the local level. In terms of push factors, which were the actors that supported gender quotas, I have listed here the international community and civil society organizations. I think the two collaborated quite strongly in terms of introducing gender quotas and advocating that the government enacts laws and supports women's representation in politics. And of course, it was mentioned in the case of Serbia as well. Democratization and EU accession have been very important, and gender equality reforms have been part of larger reforms after the fall of communism. So gender quotas were introduced and adopted in 2008. But effects were quite limited. So soon after we had elections at the central and local level, numbers did not change significantly. So women constituted 60% of the parliament and 12% of local councils. The strategies that party leaders used, will be quite familiar for you. So women were placed at the bottom of party lists. Women were recruited based on family and kinship ties quite often. And women were replaced with men when they were elected. And also based on some work that I did in local councils, I found that even though women were part of local councils, they were not invited in meetings. So they were just part of local councils because quotas required political parties to have some women in their party lists. So when the government changed in 2005, this was a critical moment. Civil society organizations and the international community with other national actors collaborated and several changes were made. The quota threshold increased at the local level from 30% to 50%. Unfortunately, it changed back to 30% later on. So another change that was introduced was that parties now face stronger sanctions, and new rules were introduced for women's position in party lists, and it was prohibited to replace women with men after women were elected. So these are some examples of rules, but these rules were actually quite critical and they affected the implementation of gender quotas. And there was a new push factor, the Alliance of Women Parliamentarians, which advocated quite strongly for gender quotas. And this alliance is supported by the international community. So we can see the difference that these changes that were introduced in 2015 made. So here in this figure, you can see women's representation in the parliament from 2005 to 2021. So the change is quite substantial from 7.1% to 35.7%. And in local councils that I studied the most, the difference is even more significant. So from 2007, when women constituted 10% of local councils, the percentage changed, increased to 43.7% in 2018. So I have done some research in local councils following the implementation of gender quotas in 2015. which was part of my Marie Curie Fellowship at Uppsala University. So I found some quite interesting things. So I, together with the research team, look into council meetings. Meetings were recorded and transcribed and then analyzed using natural language processing. So what I found was that women's contribution was quite substantial in the areas of education and social welfare. So women were advocating for more funds for education and for the expansion of social welfare programs. Also, women were more likely to take the floor compared to men and engage in a discussion of transparency. And this was especially the case in councils experiencing substantial changes in the number of women following quota implementation. Of course, women were concerned, and they said during informal conversations that we raise a voice for more transparency, but it does not mean that local councils are more transparent. So this was a big concern. Now, going back to the theme of the webinar, of course, the face of local politics, in general, has changed. So this is an example of a local council in Albania. When I started doing fieldwork in local councils, I would go to local councils when there were no women in the early 2000s. So now this is highly unlikely. There are some local councils where the ratio is 50% with 50%. So there is a greater presence of women in local councils, and I think this is a huge accomplishment. The face of national politics has also changed. So this is a recent picture from the cabinet, the prime minister and the ministers. And if you do a calculation, you will see that there are more women than men. There are actually 4 men out of 16 ministers, so 75% of the cabinet is made of women. So it's, again, it's a huge accomplishment. The face of national politics has changed. And I think we are happy to see that there is a greater presence. But there are several concerns. And these concerns are being discussed in the literature. And I think they are relevant in the case of Albania, that political leaders have recognized the gains of having more women in politics, and they are being very strategic. And I have listed here some examples. Why would political leaders use women's numbers in politics? So first of all, to improve international reputation. It's used in Albania, it's used in the region as well, when political leaders take pride in terms of, the percentage of women in the parliament or in the government and so forth. They communicate the message that political parties are more inclusive and modern. Women's representation is also used to shift attention from corruption scandals and also to justify already made decisions. And this has happened in Albania a couple of years ago. The prime minister used women's numbers in politics to oppose the idea of having open lists. Also, women are associated with a government that is becoming increasingly repressive. As you look at the picture, we have more women ministers now. Corruption is a big problem. Poverty is a big problem. Inequality is a big problem. Poor access to education is a big problem. And now people are associating this problem with women's faces and associating women with the failure of the government. And there is data showing that skepticism with women's representation in politics is on the rise. So here I have some data from the Institute for Democracy and Mediation. The report is forthcoming. So they conduct this annual survey with a nationally representative sample. And there is a question that they have been asking from 2016. This is actually a statement. And the statement goes like, women's numbers in local councils will have a positive impact on local governance, and yes or no, something like that. What you see here is the percentage of respondents who say that yes, women's numbers in local councils will have a positive impact on local governance. And as you can see, the percentage in 2022 was lower than in 2016. So 2016 is 1 year after gender quotas were reintroduced in the country. So I'm quite concerned actually about this. So a couple of notes at the end in terms of, what I think should be done, or sort of a reflection about the case of Albania. I think it is great that women's numbers in politics have increased, and I think it's something that we should celebrate. But I think it's also important that we should expose the appropriation of women's numbers in politics and be quite vocal about it. Currently, I don't see this happening, but I think it is important to happen. And I see a greater role for this in terms of academics and also civil society organizations, to say that women's numbers are important, but this is a strategy used by the government and we should be careful about it. Also, a common narrative is blaming women in terms of not being qualified and not being capable and so forth. But actually, if we look at the data, and I've studied this myself in local councils, we see that women are much more educated than men. And I think it is important to shift the attention to the strategies that party leaders are using rather than blaming women. I see this as very important. Also, I think it's important that we shift a bit the focus from studying barriers to impact to barriers to access, especially in contexts where barriers to impact has been overcome. I think now is the time to look into what happens now that women are in politics and what kind of barriers they are facing and how can we work to address those barriers. And in terms of research, I think it's very important that we collect and use women's stories to shed light on their experiences in politics and use the evidence to inform local, national, and international actors that advocate for gender equality in politics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcela, and thanks to every one of you, Liliana, Marietta, and Marcela, for your presentations. There are several common lines in your presentation that maybe we can connect and discuss. One is the importance of a lecture system and its influence on gender quotas. The other very important common feature is how important are sanctions in the whole process and how are defined and processed. The other is the position of women on the electoral list, where they are put on the electoral list, and also maybe the question that it was not mentioned in your presentation, but in my mind is very important. When we are discussing the effects of gender quotas and what women elected are doing in the politics, is the question on how long is the career of women in politics. As what I found in my research is when women are only one mandate in the parliament, they cannot do many changes because they have to adapt on the rules, on the way of life, on everything in the parliament, for example, and only when they are their second or third term, they make the change. They can make the changes because they develop the networks, they know the field, they know how it works, etc., etc. So these are my point of that I would like to discuss, but not only. And I would now like to open the floor to your questions and comments, please. So just raise the hand or just open the mic, because I don't see your faces. Let me help. If not, you presenters, you can also comment my questions for the beginning, or my comments for the beginning, and then maybe we can have some more from the public. Oh yeah, okay, there is Gordana Chomic, please.
Thank you, and thank you all of three panelists. The fun fact is that I heard absolutely nothing new, but I enjoyed every second. And thank you so much for this overview and sharing at one spot, very contextual and very useful, what has happened in our region, Croatia, Serbia, and Albania in the last 30 years. My comment would be a question or comment. Would it be possible for researchers, for women from academia, from civil society, to put all the fight for gender equality and full representation into different contexts? Because what I used to have as a problem is that women who I cooperate with, men as well, but less, took the context for granted. Like at the end of the 80s, when it was obvious that one-party system will collapse in itself, we all very much were in favor of human rights, rule of law, freedoms, media freedom, free gathering, free association, etc. We are not anymore. And that's the sad fact of the today's world. I'm following reports from European Union, and they substitute the phrase human rights with resilience. Some of you know what verb I use with resilience, because it's not about resilience, it's about human rights. It's about women human rights. It's about level of freedom in society. It's about the culture of human rights in society. And it's not promoted anymore, not in European Union, not to talk about United States. And I think that is the new context for the fight we are part of for so many years. In Serbia, thanks to civic organizations, to NGOs who fought throughout 90s and then forced actually political parties to join. And women did make a change, and we are here to stay. But that task that I see very clearly and have very few years for that, the context is taken for granted, that context does not exist anymore. And we need a movement, and a narrative, a question, a request. What the hell are you doing with the culture of human rights, with rule of law, with everything what we fought for, living in one-party society? I had some suspicions about the possible answer, but to illustrate how I'm bothered with the context is that the flag of European Union is now proudly waved only in Georgia, maybe in Ukraine. And it used to be proudly waved in North Macedonia, but 2.5 or 3 years ago. It's a sign from society that maybe they sense what has happened for the last 20 years when the trading between security and human rights started after the 9/11, and that unfortunately sometimes reflects in that famous sentence, women didn't bring any change in society, in making laws, in changing the nature of, in changing the nature of power in our society. So if it was easier, probably men would be resolving this issue. What is the context of 2020s when our fight is in question? But it's not. So I think that women will have to deal with that. And I think that would be the hardest part, harder from quota, harder from implementation, harder from fighting, patronizing women all the time. What I want to end with is if it would be possible, I would like to introduce a law against patronizing, because that's the poisoned narrative in our society. Men are patronizing women, majority are patronizing minorities, or those with money patronizing those without money. Stop patronizing, because if we just leave it as it is, we will continue to pretend that we fight for the things that are of priority in our society, and they will pretend that they are there. And actually, they're isn't what we used to think, that it is here forever. What I surely know is we are here, and we are here forever. We will not move from the level we occupied. Thank you again. I really enjoyed every second. You did excellent work. Sorry if I'm confused, but you 3 women and 4 women are very inspiring in what I wanted to share. And if you think that this is a stupid thing that I shared with you, just forget it.
Thank you very much, Gordana, for your comment. There is one more question for Marcela, and there is one more hand. I don't know who it is, but we will see. Marcela,
Yes,
the comment here in the chat is, I would like to know more about some more active participation actions from women in politics in terms of reforms being forward or led by them, motions in parliament or in local councils, or transparency accountability actions by them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marinela. Marinela is my colleague at the Department of Social Work and Social Policy. Yes, great question. What I can discuss is my work in local councils. I haven't studied parliament, so I cannot really discuss much about it in terms of research. So in local councils, I have looked into demands that women and men have made for transparency, for greater transparency, for law enforcement, and for impartiality. And in terms of transparency, so I have analyzed discussions. Local councilors have contested local government officials, for instance, for concealing information or providing misleading information or not providing any information at all. Now, local councilors do not have the same power that parliamentarians have, but they still have some power. For law enforcement, I have looked into local councilors contesting local government officials for breaking the law or failing to implement laws or neglecting to follow legal procedures. And on impartiality, I have looked into local councilors contesting local government officials for preferential treatment, for corruption, distribution of resources through clientelistic ties, and so forth. So I have analyzed discussions based on this framework, and I have compared women with men. And what I have found is that women make a difference, especially in demands for transparency. If we compare women and men in terms of demands they make for law enforcement and impartiality, for instance, contesting corruption or poor enforcement of laws, they are similar. Actually, men, it's not that they're doing a better job than women. I'm always talking statistically, so based on the statistical analysis that I have done. But when it comes to transparency, women are more likely to say, hey, we need more information, or procedures are not transparent. We need full information about taxes and funds and donations that are being made in the community. And we need to know more information about welfare beneficiaries. So we need to know the list, we need to know names, we need to know the criteria, and so forth. So women are more likely to make such requests. And again, I'm not saying that because women make such requests, local government officials become more transparent. Women themselves say no, they do not, in informal conversations, and they discuss the barriers they face. But if we analyze discussions, we see that women actually do make more demands for transparency. So, and of course, I'd be happy to share the article. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody would like to follow what Gordana says?
Yes, I would like to say just a few words about Gordana's statements, because I think that I agree with Gordana, and I think that many categories and many notions from our social sciences have to be reorganized and reconsidered again, because especially when it comes to human rights, women rights, and women issue in nowadays, when we face the completely different situation, different context, especially in few last years, and it's continuing. And I think that, and also in the light of anti-women, anti-gender, and anti-LGBT movements, that are widening in Europe and in all whole world. I think that women today and it's a very special issue about the women and the feminists activities in Europe, especially on when it comes to problem of migrations, problem of religion questions, and also we have that feminist issues now are on the west side of political spectrum. Also, on the left side, there are a few less feminist questions, feminist issues that are important for political life. But on the west side, on the political spectrum, we can find much more interesting women in social movements, in feminist movements, especially in politics, in Germany, in France, in Italy. Now we have the women on as on the top, yes, in executive branch, and we can say that nowadays the issue of women, it's not socialist left oriented. It's something completely different, and it's just it's very difficult now to find means and to find solutions for acting for women, for mobilizing more women, especially when it comes to economic sphere and precarity, and also the problem of social inequalities that are expanding so much. And in that case, I think that women are more and more concentrated to fix their problems in the sphere of West organized political agendas and political orientations. And I think that's the very big problem, and very dangerous, because if we do not stand on the history of women accessions in the field of women rights and quotas and all these that our sisters done in history, and if we do not do something with that legacy, it would be, I think, for nothing. And I think that it's a very important for our generation especially, and also for young generations, because they're in some kind of a social, political and cultural matrix, and it's very complicated to understand women rights, women issues, and whole this complex of human rights. You know, it's very difficult nowadays to explain the younger generations what to do, where to come, and how to settle in this kind of in this context, in this kind of reality. Just want to point it out.
Thank you, Liliana. Anybody else would like to add something? Maybe I can jump in this discussion. I wanted to also to share one of the important findings that I found in Slovenia, but maybe it's not only Slovenian case. We when we were doing the research on women in politics, we discovered how important is the fact of the and impact of the leading party in the country being oriented or either towards conservative or, on the other hand, or on liberal socialist left, as we found that when the leading party is more oriented to the liberal socialist left values, there are also more women, and their politics is of course different from the when the party in power is more conservative or traditional. So this effect is also important when we are trying to find what can women do and what they are doing in the politics. This is one fact, and the other is what we found out also in Slovenia is that the younger generation of women are entering into politics when they are really young, in their young age now. As for example, in the 90s or in the beginning of 2000, there are mostly women over 50 when they are entering into politics, already making their careers in their professions. But now women are entering younger, and also they're more active in the civil society. So this new generation, when coming into politics, they have more leftist, more liberal, more NGO-oriented values and views on politics. I don't know whether this is only situation here in Slovenia or it's also present in your countries. Marietta, I think you wanted to say something.
Well, I wasn't doing any research, so I can't back this up with any hard evidence. But as an educator, my experience has been that the profile of the generations changed, and I see much more engaged students. They maybe live their lives in different spheres, so digital sphere and so on, and so in that sense, maybe they're a bit invisible for us who are older, but they're more open, they're more knowledgeable when they reach the faculty. They have much more formed views. So in that sense, I see, I'm a bit of an optimist, I guess. So just my comment.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes more. Any other comments or suggestion or a quick question, short one? If not, we need an optimism, Marietta. More than ever, the comment from our colleague Sasha. Yes, I definitely approve this. Gordana, yes.
I just wanted to help with that optimism necessity. I'm a physicist by formal education. I'm a politician by accident, back on the beginning of the 90s. And the famous metaphor about is the glass half full or half empty when you see water? Well, take it from a physicist. Glass is always full. There are two fluids, water and air. You need water and you need air. So, dear ladies, our glass is always full. And the optimism is in knowledge. That is the fact. It has nothing to do with subject, but it was so tempting when you mentioned optimism.
With knowledge and with younger generation. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to thank all the speakers, to Liliana for the organization, to Sasha for the helping in organizing, and to all of you who are participated invisible and also visible in our workshop. Thank you so much, and have a great day. It's 9th of March. It's the second day of our celebration, so celebrate 8th of March, the International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.